Okay, good evening everyone and welcome to this our 7th session of the British Orienteering Development Conference. I'm Rick Gamble. I work on the British Orienteering Development team and will be helping to host this evening's session. I'm delighted to introduce Hannah. Hannah Sprague, who is an analyst with Sports Marketing Surveys, and one of the recent pieces of work she's been involved with is looking at women's sporting journeys. This body of work includes many sports, but Hannah is drawing out specific findings for orienteering. So we hope to keep this session to 1 hour. If you'd like to ask any questions, please use the question bar or the chat bar, which is on your control panel there. I will keep an eye on the questions throughout the session and maybe step in at a few occasions to ask questions. If we can't answer them during the session, we'll answer them at the end. The session is being recorded, so this recording will be available after the session and it'll be placed on the training and support page of the British Orienteering website. So that's alongside any supporting documents, for example, the slides which Hannah's going to show. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, especially if you've attended a few of our sessions already. And this conference, great to see you back and great to see anybody who's come for the first time. So Hannah, if it's okay, I will now hand over to you and I'll give you presenter. There we go. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Can you see my slides okay?
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So my name's Hannah. So I work for a company called Sports Marketing Surveys. We're a sports specialist market research company based down in Surrey. We work with a range of different sports and partners looking at into research and insight that can help people get more people engaged in sport. So I recently did a research project looking at women's sporting journeys in particular. So we were keen to look at ways that we can, well, we wanted originally to look at the different journeys that women took throughout their life stages. So from childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, later adulthood, just to kind of track those journeys and gain a bit more insight into what those experiences are like. So we had over 5,000 respondents, both male and female, fill in our survey and be part of our research. And we had a really good turnout from orienteering. So we had nearly 300 respondents, which was actually one of the top scoring sports, which was really good. But what that has meant we can do is we could actually dig down a bit deeper into the data for the orienteers, which has allowed us to put this presentation together tonight and share with you. I'm going to cover to the next slide. So what I'm hopefully going to cover in our 1 hour session, we're just going to look at the opportunity that was found in the research. We'll look at an example journey of one of the women or a couple of the women in our research. I will then dig out some key findings from the research and there'll be an interactive element for you at that stage. There'll be a little quiz, which I hopefully you'll enjoy. And then I will talk through our key insights related to some of the life stages, and I've got some actions which I'm hoping I've hopefully pulled out actions which are relevant for clubs, and I've tried to make them as orienteer specific as possible. But what I'd really value at the end is your thoughts on some of those actions, whether they are able to be implemented. Some of you may already be doing some of those actions, so if you are, that's a massive well done. And it'd just be great to talk about how we can maybe implement some of those changes in your clubs today. So that's what's coming up, and I shall get cracking first. So first of all, I wanted to sort of kind of lay the groundwork. So the situation. So I think it's hopefully because lots of you are on this call and you've chosen, you're all fully aware that there is 13.9 million women in England. Aren't active enough. So this is according to Sport England's Active Lives data. So we know that there's an inequality in the amount of physical activity women participate in. We also know that women are less active than men. And the data, again, Sport England data also shows us that women's activity levels decrease with age. So we know that there's this inequality. What our research has found is that of the respondents that responded, which most of them were people who are engaged in their sport, so it's not people who are inactive, people who are either engaged or were previously engaged in their sport. We found that 48% of women took a break from their sport at some point in their life stages. That could be whether they were 16, whether they were 35, whether they were 65. It was across all life stages, irrespective of playing performance level and also the frequency of their participation. So if we take that 48% and apply that to the number of women who are actually active across England using the Sport England data, what we found is that actually there's potentially 8.3 million women who are likely to take a break from their sport, at least one break at some point in their life stage. So what we have, our kind of call to action from our research and what we dig deeper into is, if that's the potential, 8.3 million women are likely to take a break, how can sports clubs, whether you're leisure centres, anyone who's providing sports activities, how can we together turn, I wish the women saying, I wish I'd returned sooner, how can we change that to be, I came back as soon as I was ready? There's so many women in our research who commented, the comments about, oh, if only I'd come back sooner, or I forgot I enjoyed that so much, I really forgot I enjoyed that, wish I'd come back sooner, was something that's said quite a lot. So what this piece of research is hopefully going to provide you some insights in is how, as activity deliverers or sports clubs, how you can help support women to take possibly fewer or shorter breaks. We know breaks are inevitable amongst women for various reasons, which we'll cover, but how can we together make them shorter or fewer breaks? That's the aim of this evening's session. Before we get into data and stats and things, I want to start with a story. So this is a lady called Karen. She's kind of she's an example of a persona from the women who took part, and I have taken the examples of the story from female orienteers. So they are from the research. So this is Karen, not specifically Karen, but a photo of an orienteer. But this is Karen. So Karen's journey started, she was introduced to orienteering by a teacher, and they just took a minibus from school one day. Don't really remember why she went along, but it was sold to her well. She went along and she said, really good decision. During her childhood and adolescence, she used to be really competitive in orienteering. For her, results were very important and one of her key motivations for participating in orienteering. She took part while she was at uni, but she did start to do less of it, other demands on her time, social activities, study. So the frequency dropped, but actually she started to enjoy it more. So she was still competitive, but she didn't take it as seriously anymore. She was now, the motivation shifted and it was a bit more for the fun element of participation. She continued to do it through her early adulthood. She enjoyed taking part, even though, fitness takes a hit. And, we've all been there, I've been there. You start work, everything else, and you no longer have you got time to go for your, daily runs or all those extra bits of fitness that you used to do. So you're not really as fit as she was, but she still enjoyed taking part. And for her, it was the escape from the cares of everyday life. That was the reason that motivated her to continue her participation. As she's moved into later life, she's actually tried to give back in her sport, and she's trying to help with some junior and beginner training sessions. So getting involved in the club, volunteering, giving back, helping that next generation is something that has motivated her to stay engaged in her sport. And then recently, she's actually moved house, and actually having that orienteering club engagement has meant that she's been able to find friends in a new area. So all that time that she's been involved in orienteering, it's actually felt more like a family to her. And actually that ability to turn up to a new club in a new area has helped her settle into that area and make new friends. So it's a wider benefit to her participation. So I think what Karen's journey shows, and it's an example of what we saw in many women, is actually a lot of women, they start the sport, the motivations change throughout, and the connection that they have with the sport, again, might change at different life stages, but for many of them, once they have that deeper connection, it's actually something that they do remain engaged in throughout their life stages. So just a bit of an example to kind of lay the ground, I suppose, before we move into some data. So we're going to look at some of the key findings from the research, and we're going to do a little quiz, and I've got a helpful assistant who's going to help me with this. So the first one is a question for everyone on the session. So what I would like you to let me know is, who is more likely to take a break from orienteering? You should have a questions pop up in front of you with 3 options.
Should be up now.
Cool. So cast your votes now, please.
Should we do a countdown?
You can. I can't see if it. Don't know if there's a counter on there.
There isn't a countdown. I'll do a do.
Oh.
Okay, I'll close it.
Cool. Are you guys, Rick, are you able to get the results?
I'm trying to find, I've done, click something. I'm sorry, there we go. Let's see. Yeah, 86% of people voted and 100% voted for a woman.
100%. Okay. Fine. So what we found with our research, so of the women who took a break, so you can see the base numbers at the bottom there. So within the orienteers, there are 145 women who took a break from orienteering at some point during their life stages. So within the sample, 36% of women took a break and 44% of men took a break. And to the right, we've got the average across all sports. So what we can see, there's actually amongst the males in the panel, actually the number that took a break was kind of in line with the average across all sports. But what was interesting was that with the women, actually slightly fewer took a break from orienteering, which is very interesting in that whether the question was, did you take a break for longer than a year? So it may be that women in orienteering are taking slightly shorter breaks, or perhaps they are remaining engaged in the sport, but perhaps not as intense as before. So obviously similar to Karen's experience, perhaps the frequency of their participation decreased, and that's why actually they didn't have that full-on break from the sport for longer than a year. So what will be very interesting to talk about towards the end is whether that's a similar experience from either any females who are on the call, or also what people are seeing within the clubs. So second question is, of those women who did take a break, what is the most common age when women took a break from orienteering? So hopefully you will be given some, that's it, and there should be some age brackets.
Votes are coming in.
Excellent.
Now 5 seconds, and I'll be closing. Okay, I'll close. Actually, there's only two were selected. I'll just write this down just in case I lose it. I'll just close. Yeah, so the results were 68% of people voted for 18 to 35 years, and 32% voted for the next bracket up, the 36 to 55 years. So nobody voted for the older age groups or the youngest group.
Okay, fantastic. So what did we find in our snapshot, our kind of panel? So we would be similar. So this graph shows we've got male and female, and we've also got orienteers, and then I've also added in the average across all other sports so that we can see how the sport compares. So same as all other sports and similar to male and female. 16 to 35 is the most common life stage for taking a break. And we can see actually amongst the women, when you compare it to the other sports, it's slightly higher, not a huge amount, but there's a slight elevation there, and that slightly more women are taking that break there. And then also very interesting that the vote was split between 18 to 35 and 36 to 55, because actually what we found was that the 36 to 55 was the next age band that saw the most in orienteering. So if we look at the 17%, it was the second highest band. Whereas if you look at other sports, actually they're seeing that drop off a little earlier between the 13 to 17s. So I think what's very interesting here is orienteers, yes, we're seeing that drop off in the 18 to 35 and possibly slightly higher than other sports. We're then not seeing it as early as other sports, which again was another interesting finding from the research. And then your final question. So with those women who are taking a break, what was the most common reason why they took a break? So you should have just 5 options. We did have, there were asked more in the study, but we've just given you 5 answers to have a look at this evening.
Votes are coming in, looking fast. Give another few seconds to get the last votes in. Okay, I'll close it now. So the results were nobody voted for access to facilities or sessions. Only 5% said due to injury. The next smallest was 11% for other leisure interests, and very close, 42% said lack of time. Actually, both the same, 42% lack of time and 42% maternity. So those were the 2 biggest ones.
Okay. So what did we find? So our data very similar. So lack of time, the top reason for why women took a break. Same for men there as well. It was very interesting then compared to the results of our poll there. So access to facilities and sessions was actually the second highest reason given by respondents. And when you compare the male and female there, the females is again almost twice as big, twice as common as male respondents. Obviously maternity, paternity, and also injury, they are there. That's, it's almost a fifth of women are taking a break for those reasons, which are kind of to be expected. Maternity, for those who do choose, it is a time where you will have a break from the sport. And injury, as everyone ages, our bodies give up on us. So injury is something that comes to us all with age. But the 2 that are interesting, I think, are the other leisure interests and the desire to take part in other sports. So we can see with other leisure interests, actually, it was quite highly common amongst women, especially when you compared it with males. So again, this could be things that people are doing with their families or other activities going on in the local area, or just other things that they wanted to spend their free time doing. Whereas for men in the study, actually the competition with the other sports was actually something for a fifth, almost a quarter of men, something that was a reason for the break. Whereas for women, it wasn't. So there's potentially a group of women who are doing other sports, but actually they can quite happily do it alongside orienteering and maintain their participation within the sport. So a few interesting findings there, slightly different to what the group were expecting. So hopefully some food for thought there with some of the reasons why people take a break. In terms of, we also asked women what barriers they experienced when they first started orienteering. So these are the answers from the women. We did also look at the responses from men. So similarities between genders were fitness was a barrier or a concern for people when starting. But also it's linked with the access, which was as one of the challenges, was related to travel and transport. And obviously talking to the team at British Orienteering, obviously I suppose it is a slight challenge with orienteering as a sport because people do need to travel to the events. They're not as local as maybe some other sports, you know, your local tennis club at the top of the road, or putting on a pair of trainers and just going out for a plain run. So that barrier, but it may be an immovable barrier. It's just one of those things that comes with the sport, but it's worth noting that that's linked with why people picked access as well in the previous option. But the main one I wanted to draw your attention to on this presentation was knowledge. So it was the biggest reason given by women. And when we looked at the comments, it was around knowledge on how the sport worked, reading the maps, but also use of jargon and not feeling they understood the terminology that was used within the sport. And this didn't come out as high in the male respondents, so it was something that was more common amongst women. And then we also compared these barriers against the barriers that female runners stated. And what was quite interesting when I compared the two is amongst runners, it was the word kind of self-confidence and low confidence came up. So there were lots of words around self-consciousness, embarrassment, or intimidation when they're out running, came up quite a bit. But in the panel of female orienteers, you can see that those words don't appear. There's a very small confidence towards the right there. Actually, it was more the knowledge or not quite understanding the knowledge, not being fully aware of it was more of a barrier for female in orienteering. We also had a quick look at reasons why women and men both started orienteering. So what we found here, which was very interesting, especially when we compared it to other sports, was where we've got the two hearts on the chart. So for a lot of other sports, actually, it was the improving physical health or improving well-being were kind of strong motivators to get people started. But amongst orienteers, you can see they are there and they are a motivator, but they're not as strong as the factors on the left. So enjoyment, getting outdoors and in nature and trying something new and spending time with friends and families tended to be the four key motivators that came up for orienteers, and very similar for men and females you'll see on those bars on the far left. And where there were differences between the gender, it was the socializing aspect. And what was interesting was that it's to spend time with friends and family, whereas if you see second in on the right, to meet new people, is slightly lower. So only 9% of women were motivated to meet new people, but actually 30% were motivated to spend time with friends and family. So that socializing aspect is very important for women when they were starting orienteering. We then, as I said earlier, we compared orienteering and running. We did the same for reasons why they started. And again, very similar. There's almost a left-hand split and a right-hand split. So we can see orienteering is the yellow bar. So we can see the first four on the left. So again, same four: enjoyable, getting outdoors in nature, trying something new, and spending time with friends and families were all stronger motivators for orienteers rather than runners. Whereas when we looked at the runners, the things that got them going and motivated them were those health-related factors. So the being active, improving physical health, and improving well-being. And I thought it was very interesting to see that difference between two sports which do have some similarities between the nature of the activity, and this is potentially what would set orienteering apart from running. If a woman was thinking, oh, I want to do some form of activity, which of the two would I choose? So I'll pause there. That's the kind of key findings. Before I move on to the key insights, I don't know if any questions have come through, Rick, of anyone, any comments, thoughts on any of those key findings that anyone wanted to share.
No questions come through yet, Hannah, but if anybody wants to throw a question into the question chat or chat bar, please do so. It certainly has been. I'm fascinated to see the difference in motivations between orienteering and running. Certainly, I thought they'd be similar. And so when it comes to maybe publicity and whatnot, it's something for us as people to think about and clubs to think about. Certainly interesting. It interests me with regards to sort of how I approach publicity for my club. So yeah,
Mm.
and there are obviously the male and females differences, but it's not as big a difference between males and females within orienteering as it is between females in running. So yeah, that's certainly
Yeah.
something I find interesting.
Yeah, I think there's the general health factors, everyone's aware of those. So I think that is there. But with so much options, as everyone is emerging from the last 2 years, people are potentially going to be more selective in terms of what they spend their time on. So if we can position orienteering to help really tap into those motivations that maybe other sports such as running cannot meet, it's potentially a good way to kind of keep yourselves kind of get ahead of those other sports and encourage more men and women to take part in orienteering going forward.
Yeah, it certainly is something being an individual sport as ours is,
Mm.
and yet the social aspect is such a big thing. It's quite interesting, and how do we build the social aspect into an event or into just the club in general. So yeah, I'm sure there's lots of food for thought for people out there. So
Shall I move on and if anyone has any extra
oh,
questions?
I've got a question actually from Eileen
Oh,
here coming in. Did you find that as orienteering is a family sport, this motivates women to participate also? Did you
yes,
look into the family aspect?
in the a lot of the open-ended comments, there were a lot of positive comments from women who enjoyed the sport and found real benefit because of the intergenerational elements of the sport. So being able to take part in the same course, whether it's 12-year-old child, mother, grandmother, the ability to do it together was mentioned quite a lot in the comments around highlights of their journeys in the sport.
Super, thank you. I'll let you continue on then.
Okay. So looking at all of the data across all of the sports, there were three key takeaways that we drew out from the research. So the first one was for sports clubs, sports organisers, national governing bodies such as British Orienteering, was to work to normalise and embrace squiggly sporting journeys amongst women. So by that I mean journeys which are maybe stop-start. You might come to a sport, then go to another sport. It's not it's not a linear journey that you stay and stay in that same sport. So the reason why we have this insight is that what we found was that more than a quarter of women actually predicted that their participation will decrease after age 35. So we did ask people to predict their participation for future life stages. So when you take that and then also look at Sport England's data, which also shows that participation does decrease with age, what we're actually finding is it's almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. People are expecting to decrease their amount of physical activity and then they do experience it. So what we're saying is what we need to do as a sector is help to normalise and challenge those assumptions so that actually amongst men, women, it's actually known that it's normal to have those squiggly stop-start sporting journeys to help people embrace them and have the journey that works for them within their lifestyle. So the second one is to frame sport as a valuable life enhancing tool. So when we looked across all sports, this is when motivations for starting. So when women were motivated to start their sport for reasons of well-being, meet new people, those that were kind of beyond the traditional to improve my physical health, to improve my mental health, actually there was six in 10 of those women continuously participated in their sport compared to an average of 4 in 10. So what we've found is when people do have that deeper connection to more broader benefits, they actually stayed engaged a lot more. And there were so many comments from women saying how their sport was their savior, their escape from everyday life, especially when they were going through challenging moments in their life, that actually it was such a lifesaver. So what we are saying is we kind of need sports to help women to realize that, be more aware of that, to nurture that deeper connection to their sport, which would enable them to remain engaged in their sport for longer. And the third one is possibly not the most groundbreaking insight. I think it's been mentioned by other research projects and other organizations, but the need to understand and reflect the changing motivations of women across their life stages. So as the example at the beginning showed with Karen, the motivations will change through their life stage, whether it starts with enjoyment and competition, then moves to meeting new people, and then later in life trying something new. So as sports, how can we make sure we reflect that in our marketing, the delivery of our sessions, to really help women through those kind of ups and downs through their life stages? So key life stages. There was one in particular that stood out for orienteering, which was 18 to 35s. So young adulthood was a key life stage because quite a lot of people started the sport at this age, quite a lot of them took a break, and then quite a lot of them returned. But it was in line with what other sports did. So there are no real surprises, but it's a key life stage. You can see the numbers, 29%, 68, 52. So key life stages when there's a lot of stop and starting during this life stage. An example, which again we pulled out of the data, was Jess. So when Jess was at university, she was able to get transport to her activities, go with her peers. But when she actually left university, she moved house, which actually took her away from her club and her established friendships, which actually made it harder for her to get lifts to the events. And now she's a mum. The travel is actually something that's quite difficult for her and with her daughter, and childcare, finding childcare, it can take up family time at weekends. So in this life stage, there's a lot of kind of changes going on in women's life, and I think it's something all sports need to be mindful of. So when we looked at reasons why women took a break, we specifically looked at orienteering in this life stage. So what we saw was actually that the other leisure interest was a very high, reason for why women took a break from their sport. So this is linked with the kind of starting families, other activities that are going on. And what was interesting, especially for orienteering, was that it wasn't, in other sports, confidence was higher. And actually, it was more how the sport fitted in with their lifestyle rather than their personal confidence levels, which were some of the key reasons for the break. And also we can see, which we previously touched on, the access to facilities and sessions was quite a key reason, more than other sports. And I think this links back to what was mentioned again in some of the barriers, the travel, the transport aspect, especially at this life stage, was more of a barrier in orienteering than was seen in other sports. Again, something that possibly not much can be done about it, but it is worth being mindful of as one of the barriers. Also, it's a key life stage where women are returning to the sport. Excuse me. So when we looked at orienteering in particular, we see the two motivations, which again came up as reasons for starting. Getting outdoors and in nature, again, massively higher compared to other sports, and spending time with friends and family, again, almost 3 times as high compared to all sports, and the aspects of improving physical health, well-being, and being active, less so, still there, but less important than other sports. So again, something to be mindful of when trying to re-engage women in the sport. And then the other life stage I just want to touch upon, I'm not going to go into detail, is the slightly older age group, which obviously also came up in our quiz as one of the highest areas for breaks.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second before you move on to this next stage, Hannah?
Yeah.
A question came in here from Julia. Well, it's more of a statement, really, and it probably reflects quite a lot of women here on the call. She says, I find childcare is an issue and a barrier to engagement. Also, the timing aspect of coordinating children and parents running. And with regards to that Hannah, quite often, you have, because it's an individual sport, and you have this, it's like it's times. You've got a time slot where you start, and it's just. And maybe if you're a single parent, it's particularly difficult because you'd have to time your run at the same time as your child. But then the child's run is maybe a lot shorter than yours, so they're back and waiting. Or even if there's 2 people to look after the child, then you sort of have to organise your time so one of them's there. So there are those barriers, and it's certainly something which clubs need to maybe look at. If there is that sort of facility for not necessarily childcare, but just like a space a safe space where there is somebody looking after children who come in early and the parents are still out. So yeah, it's certainly something to think about. And but I find that I've got two kids who are sort of bigger and bolder now to look after themselves. But certainly going through that myself, I understand that issue.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. So the other life stage, just to draw attention to, there's more information in the report, which we'll send a link round to, is the middle-aged adulthood. So again, this tended to be a time where there were, again, an opportunity for people to start the sport. People are still taking breaks, but also it's a key time, again, for people to return. So if women are having slightly longer breaks, it might be that they're able to return in this age band as well. So it's a life stage to be mindful of, as well as the previous one. So ideas for actions that you can take back to your clubs. The first one is around preventative actions. So what can we do to help reduce the length of breaks if we know that women are most likely to take a break? So the first one is linked with our first key insight. So it's about celebrating women who return. So it's about how is your club or your session helping to challenge those embedded assumptions. So are we celebrating or sharing stories about women who have returned after maternity or returned after an injury? So I saw one example is actually a hockey club. It was Cambridge City Hockey Club. And they did on their Instagram feed during, I think it was during the first lockdown, they did a post every single day. They alternated between male and female, but they focused on a different club member every day. And they celebrated that club member for who they are on and off the pitch. So the successes in their life, whether it's at school or maybe they've done a charity event, but they celebrated them and what they did for who they are, so that people could see that there are other women like them taking part in sport. You know, they may not be as fit as they were when they were in their 20s, but they're still taking part in their sport. And it goes back to the kind of saying that if you can see it, you can be it. So it's thinking about celebrating those women who do return to your sport. The second one was about thinking about the environment that's created, whether that's at training or events. And it's about how we can create that environment that says to women before they take their break, you know, we're here when you're ready. So they know if they are going to be taking a break, that the environment is a place where they will feel comfortable. So the key elements that women asked for were a compassionate, non-judgmental and inclusive environment. and that was irrespective of their ability or their frequency of participation. So one idea would be to take back to your club is to maybe to speak to those women who have returned, maybe after starting a family or an injury or a break for a career, change of career or something like that. Ask them, how was their experience at returning? Is there something that you could have done differently that would have helped that transition for them? And just see if there's any small changes that could be made within the club setting. And then the third one is to plan to stay connected. So again, before people take a break or very soon after, how can you keep them engaged? Is there a volunteering role that they can do? Is it something that they can do at the event, or maybe something they can do remotely? So I've had first-hand experience of this. I play hockey, I'm quite prone to injuries, and when you're injured, rehab is a very lonely place. You have to do it away from your club setting, away from in my case, the matches. It can be very lonely, and I often think of how can the club have engaged me more or kept me more connected to the club, so I still felt like part of the family, even though I wasn't doing the normal sessions that everyone else was. So it's thinking about ways that you can keep connected with people whilst they're on the break, so that hopefully they'll return as soon as they can when they're ready. The next one was about how to re-engage lapsed women. So it's about linked to what we were saying earlier. So there were those main motivators around why people and women took part in orienteering. So it's thinking beyond the traditional, come back to orienteering, good for your health, good for your mental health. Can we focus on some of the other areas, the getting outdoors, spending time with friends and family? And it's how to reignite and get people to remember that real reason why they thoroughly enjoyed the sport previously. And it might come through a children's session. There was one lady in the study who was an orienteer, and she actually came back to the sport because her son did it at the Scouts, with Scouts. And actually there was a leaflet or a flyer that said, oh, why don't you come along to our adult sessions? And she got back into it that way. So it's just thinking maybe slightly outside the box. How can you reignite women's passion rather than just try and encourage them to come back? The second one is linked with the imagery and the language that's used in our marketing. So women, if they're going to be returning, they may not feel they're as fit and able as they were previously, or maybe not as much disposable income. So it's thinking about the imagery that's used of the women, and equally down to the kit that people are wearing in the imagery. So instead of using imagery of women who've got all the gear or all the like lycra and the top branded shoes, not everyone will be able to afford that. So thinking about who's in those photos and what are they wearing, so that people can see that that sport is for like them. So they don't think, oh, I don't have all the gear, therefore I'm not a hardcore orienteer, making it so it's open to everyone. And then linked with that is in the marketing is not being afraid to be deliberately focused. So the motivations that we found, so the being outdoors and in nature, it's almost better to be something to someone rather than everything to everyone. So there's no harm in maybe going big with focusing on that get outdoors, get in nature marketing, and just seeing what comes from that marketing maybe on social media. Because you may not get hundreds of people engaged, but you might get a few with that message really resonated with them, and they may actually be really engaged club members. So it's about encouraging clubs to be focused with their marketing and kind of just trying it out and seeing what happens. And then the third one is about nurturing, it's around retention really, how you can try and retain women in the sport. So the first one is around that injury piece. So we know that women, well, everyone, as we age, our bodies do give up on us. So how can we help women to maintain their ability to continue participation, whether that's just education on stretching, conditioning earlier in life, rather than waiting for our bodies to let us down? How can we help teach the juniors of good habits so they can continue participating? And equally, what support and advice do clubs provide people who do get injured? I'm not saying clubs need to provide full-on physio tables and qualified medics, but can there be any advice, or just pointing them in the right direction of places where they can find an advice. So it's not when they're injured that they just give up. The third one is around keeping the sport enjoyable. So 90% of women in the study said they were motivated to participate throughout all of the life stages for enjoyment. So it's thinking about how we can keep the sport enjoyable and inclusive for women of all ages. So just because a woman reaches slightly older life stage, let's say it's inevitable. Fitness may not be the level it was when they were 20, but that doesn't mean their technical skills will have decreased by the same amount. So it's thinking about on the courses or the events, how can we make it so it's still enjoyable for women of all ages? Are there elements that can be walked? Are there elements that maybe aren't, but that avoid something that's very steep, slippery, or going through too much woodland? And it's just, I suppose, thinking of from other people's perspective, how can we make sure the sessions are inclusive for everyone? And then the third one is trying to encourage people to make for orienteering to be a sport for life. And I think this is one, based on all the responses that I read in the research, I think this is one you're probably all doing really well already. So it's about how to help people embed the sport in their lifestyle. So a lot of people spoke about how they volunteered at their events, they were giving back, and actually by doing that they felt like they really belonged to the orienteering family, whether that was in the UK. They felt they can go to any of the events and feel at home. And a lot of them also spoke about going to European countries and really feeling at home. So I think this is something a lot of clubs are already doing. So it's just, are there any other smaller ways that you can help people to really have that sense of belonging, that sense of family, so that they stay engaged with the sport for longer? And those are our kind of main actions, suggestions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is anyone already doing any of those actions that are working really well, or are there any in there that you hadn't thought of that you might be able to implement?
That's exactly what I was going to ask myself. I will give the chance to people if you want to put your hands up. There's a facility for you to put hands up if you want to, and I can unmute you and you could ask the question directly or put it in the question box. But yeah, that's exactly the question I was going to ask. Are there people out there or clubs out there who are already doing some female specific targeted things? I'm sure we could all learn from each other that way. Or maybe is there something after from Hannah's presentation? Maybe there's something you think, oh, maybe I could do that, or maybe I could approach the committee to maybe possibly do that. So I'm just going to unmute Carol. Carol's got a question. Let me see if I can do that. Sorry, Carol, I'm trying to try my best here. I'll just unmute everybody, and then Carol, you can speak up. Hopefully this will work. No.
Oh, hello.
Oh,
Hello.
hi,
Is that Carol?
Hi.
Brilliant.
We've had before Christmas a women's only weekend, and it was tremendous success because we had women coaches, and the women that came, we just dealt with whatever level they were at, and it was just enjoyable for everybody. And it really came home to me that as it was sort of like they wanted to try orienteering, but you know, didn't want to fail, or it was a confidence thing. And because it was all sort of middle of the road technical wise women, that everybody made real progress. And some people who had never orienteered, they started on the Saturday morning, and by the time after Sunday they were all doing like green orienteering. You know, they're intelligent women, they just needed to be shown what to do, and we thought it was great. It worked.
Fantastic. I think that's great. I think there were quite a few women in the study. I think when they got to middle age, adulthood, that personal mastery element became quite strong. There were quite a few women keen to try something new and kind of keen to try maybe something that they didn't do at school, which tended to be very traditional: hockey, netball, tennis. So they're keen to try something new, and then they were keen to do individual sports. And we looked at when they started team sports to individual sports. Individual sports were started much later in life. And when we looked at some of the comments, it was because quite a lot of women felt that actually individual sports worked for them because they could do it at their own pace. They weren't letting anyone down if they possibly weren't feeling as fit that day, or just not really on it that day. They weren't letting anyone else down. They could push themselves, and actually that was a real motivator for them. So I do think there's a window there for orienteering to kind of fill that gap for women who are looking for that sort of activity.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, I've got another question coming here from Julie. It's more not really a question, it's just an example here of something's going on. Another good example. Their club, SOS, are running a This Girl Can program, which encourages women of all ages to participate in a beginner series of coaching sessions, and leading on then to participation in one of the club events. So I guess to have this session specific for women, and yeah, with the focus of then getting them together with the whole sort of club. I suppose breaking the barrier down before they actually go to an event, which could be maybe quite intimidating. So it's great. Thanks,
and I
Julie.
think that those sorts of things really help with the knowledge barrier. I think if there's an opportunity, you know, a lot of, I know a number of clubs do have on their website the section, you know, what is orienteering, and that there's information on there, which is great to kind of help people with those initial barriers to make that step to come along. But still, it's the kind of doing it practically. So having that support there to help women, or also men as well, just to help people get to grips and see what it's actually like, could be invaluable to helping people kind of overcome those barriers if they do have them.
Super. Any other questions before we close this evening's session from anybody? Raise your hand or put something in the question bar. Okay, I don't think so, Hannah. So can I say a big thank you on behalf of everyone who's attended this evening, on behalf of British Orienteering. Certainly I've taken things away. I'm going to bring back to the team, and hopefully everyone on this call has certainly learned something. Maybe our expectations have been, definitely mine hasn't been altered from the insight which you've given. So thank you for your time and your efforts on this, and yes, all the very best. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye now.
Yes.